So welcome everybody to our TJ Talks webinar from Training Journal. This is me. My name is Jo Cook and I'm the Deputy Editor of Training Journal. And one of the things that I do here is I host these webinars. Now this is our insight webinar where we speak to somebody who's kind of very well known in the industry. In this case, it's Gerry, and we'll introduce him in a moment. And I think this quote really kind of sets us on the right path to our TJ Talks Insight webinar. Learning is not attained by chance. It must be sought. And it must be sought for with ardour and attended to with diligence. And I think that really kind of sets the scene for the fact that we need to go and focus on our CPD, and that's what you're all doing here today. So please do use that chat window. Ask questions of each other, have a little chat in there. If you've got something to share, please go and do so. If you think, oh yes, I saw a really good blog about that. Also, you can ask questions in there, but we also have a separate question area at the very bottom of the screen. If you've got a specific question for Gerry on the topics that we're going to speak about, and you absolutely want to make sure I see it, please use that question area at the bottom of the screen and I will weave it into our conversation. And as I say, join us on Twitter where we've got #TJTalks, and you can go and kind of share some little learning nuggets that you've picked up, and you can actually kind of make sure that everybody else has the benefit of you being here today. All our sessions are recorded and available on the website, including all our previous sessions. We've got loads of them, so do go and have a look. So I think it's about time that we found out a little bit more about our speaker. And it is Gerry from Skillpill. And what we're focusing today is very much on getting the most of your digital learning. So let me get Gerry and myself on video, because it's always good to be able to see who we're talking to. And what I'm going to do is, thank you, Gerry, is get you to unmute, Gerry, and just tell us a little bit about who are you and what is it that you do and what does Skillpill do?
Well, hello everybody. Good to talk to you this afternoon. I'm Gerry from Skillpill. I am founder of Skillpill, and we do digital learning, which is handy enough given that that's what we're going to be talking about today. We focus on two areas. One, the enterprise market, that's the corporate market internationally. We have 1 million learners around the world in 120 countries. And in this last year, I spent a lot of my life working in the apprenticeship space with Pearson. So I was at the annual college conference last week in Birmingham talking about digital strategy and an earlier market than we normally speak to or about, which is the 16 to 19-year-old bracket as well, and so-called Gen Z, or maybe it's Gen A now as well. Maybe it's like number plates, it goes around again. But anyway, what we do is we get immersed in content, strategy, and technology as well. At the end of this talk, if in the unlikely event it is of interest and use to you, there is a micro-learning and digital learning white paper that you can get access to, which summarizes some of the key points that we're trying to make today. But as Joe and I agreed, we really want to make this an interactive session. I used to be a trainer, so I've sort of a primordial dislike of PowerPoint slides. So we're going to kick off with a video. I'm going to extract a couple of learning points from the video and use that really to structure our debate and dialogue. And feel free to complain or disagree or push back on anything as well. This is just some of the insights that we have gleaned, and I'm happy to share with them in the first instance. So, Joe, if you want to roll the first video, then we can get talking about that.
Can you fly that thing?
Not yet.
Operator.
Tank, I need a pilot program for a B-212 helicopter. Hurry. Let's go.
Well, I think we probably all recognise this video. We've probably all seen that. So, Gerry, tell us what are some of the things that you wanted to pick out from that video from The Matrix?
Sure. So now Mandy has indicated that she hasn't got the sound on that. So Mandy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the points anyway and just kick that off. This is really just a scene setter. And in fact, if anybody saw an uncanny resemblance between myself and Keanu Reeves, yeah, I get that a lot. Let's kick off with the the key points. There's about 5 key points in this video, and I think that they, when digital learning goes well, these are the things that are going on behind it as well. And there's some tactical things, but there's also some strategic insights and so on that we can talk about. So if you didn't pick up the sound, don't worry, I'm going to talk through the events of the video. Anyway, so the first thing is anytime, any place. Where did the video take place? Where does the learning intervention take place? So the plot, for those of you who didn't hear it, is that they're on top of a building. She goes and gets the program for a helicopter. They jump in it to get away from the baddies that are coming up the stairs. So the first thing that is becoming more commonplace in digital learning, and if you like, it's a key framework to think about what digital learning is supposed to be, is that it's available anytime, any place. We've moved away from the chalk and talk, from the classic framework environment. I'm more Vic Reeves. Okay, thank you. They're heckling already. They're all in tonight. So anyway, these glasses are just for my computer, by the way. I've also had some CGI de-aging as well by Netflix put in, so that's working well for me. So anyway, what was I saying is that a lot of digital learning these days is about trying to free up learning from a fixed time and place. Under the hood of that is an understanding, really, that good face-to-face learning is fantastic, but people forget a lot of material. And within 6 weeks, 85% of that content can be lost, which is a pretty inefficient model. I used to work at London Business School. Their day rate for a custom program is about £25,000 per day. So multiply that by 85%, and you can see an inherent inefficiency in the model. So the starting point really is to think about how can digital, and to a degree cloud, make more efficient that intervention. So anytime, any place is an early thinking point around where digital learning kind of kicks in and how it can sit alongside face-to-face learning. As part of our open dialogue, I might want to talk a little bit about how you position one against the other. Sorry, Joe?
Digital and cloud. So can you just explain that and why that distinction is important, please?
Well, if you like, and this is something that came up in my talk last week at the AOC conference, I think digital just is a generic term we use to differentiate it from analog. So if somebody's talking like I am now, that's an analog discussion if you're in the room. If it's being distributed via digital technology, as you see here, with some quite decent support tools, it becomes more of a synchronous digital experience. Under the hood of good digital, though, is the idea of storage and also ownership as well. So these are strategic intents. So to do with storage, how can we remember things? Where do we store things? Think about how many telephone numbers we remember these days. Probably not actually that many, because we're increasingly delegating or subcontracting our memory, if you like, to the cloud, which is where it sits in practice. So under the hood of digital is the idea of storage. If we're leaving our car in a car park, quite a lot of the time we'll take a picture of the place where we've left it, and then we look at that. So we don't actually remember anymore. And think about an instructional or pedagogic journey. It is a lot to do with memory and recall. So if we're beginning to use our devices, technology, to store content, that's one key pillar of digital. The other key interesting element of digital is the idea of ownership. And here, if we look to move to digital as a GPS or a sat-nav, think now that we don't need to remember anymore how to get from A to B. We just need to know how to use our Google Maps on our phone or our sat-nav in our car. And no matter how many times we go from A to B, we still don't need to remember that. And quite a lot of the time we don't. So the idea of owning knowledge and displaying knowledge the way we would have an MBA or a degree or an apprenticeship is being slowly moved to an idea that we actually have a disposable sense of knowledge where we call down knowledge at a moment of need, which is what we're going to see in the Matrix clip here, which is, can you fly that thing? And she says, not yet. She doesn't have, thankfully, this is science fiction, but she's able to call down a piece of content and then maybe dispose of it when she doesn't need it anymore. So maybe I'm over answering your question, Joe, but digital really is around the idea of cloud storage. Where do we leave things? And also our our psychological relationship with knowledge in the terms of, do we need to know this at a deep lying level? So in that instance, think of the London taxi driver who will have to do the knowledge, which is 2 to 3 years learning 22,500 streets and 300 different routes, being replaced by a sat-nav, which gives an aerial view of where traffic is and can move people around. And I think we're sort of moving in part to that model of knowledge as well, which is what digital represents. So I have flicked around a little bit between those pieces of terminology.
Knowledge skill gap, because we talked in our video before today about the Uberization of learning, which is what you're kind of describing there. So talk to us about kind of the knowledge skill gap and moving that into the agile technology, because digital is all about the technology we use, but a lot of us will have clunky old technology. We won't have access to things. They'll be restricted. And we might hear of amazing companies doing amazing things, but what about us? So I think there's an interesting divide there between the haves and the have-nots.
Well, to that point, Joe, I actually feel that as consumers, people who just have a daily life, we tend to be ahead of most enterprise technology, to be honest. So, coming up to the festive period, there might be a lot of kit, or coming up to Black Friday, actually, on Friday, there'll be a lot of consumer kit that is bought, which tends to be actually a lot of the time ahead of what we in the organization and in enterprise have. So if there is a hiatus between the haves and the have-nots, I'd kind of invert it and say typically the enterprise environment can still stuck with Netscape, 3.1 is just gone past having a BlackBerry. And is so locked down in many regards that they can't do a lot of things. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit for effect, but I think there is a gap. But I think it's the opposite way that you're implying. But the second element that's coming out of the Matrix clip is the idea of a skill gap. And part of digital learning is moving away and towards a self-directed environment where we are asking and trusting the individual to acknowledge where they need help and then to give them material to call down and help them in the way that Carrie-Anne Moss was able to call down a piece of content. Keanu said to her, "Can you fly that thing?" And she says, "Not yet." So here's a question for us to think about. As in the L&D profession, do we trust our colleagues to acknowledge their own skill gaps and then to perhaps take the time out to call down that material to help them, deal with a particular upcoming challenge? Because that is really a key assumption underneath smart, good digital learning, that the learning officer provides an easy to access buffet of material that is nicely tagged, metadata, taxonomy, and so forth. But then the individual calls it down at the moment of need, and so forth. Now, differing organizations, particularly those that are more regulated, say healthcare, finance, have less of a tradition of the individual leaning forward and taking responsibility for their learning journey, and more are occupied by compliance learning, which is clearly mandated and moving people through a series of information transactions. They tend to struggle a little bit more by moving their population towards, you're grown up, you're a smart person because that's why we hired you, and you need to take responsibility for your learning and for your career journey. So the second point around this, which is really the idea of trust, is the notion of, do you allow people to acknowledge their own skill gaps? Some do, some don't. When I do this in a learning forum face-to-face, I see some shakes, some nods that go around that. But that's key. Now, part of that might be a fear that, we in the learning world are brokers. We mediate between blocks of knowledge, be they e-learning or training or coaching or mentors or whatever, and our population. We validate it for price, for quality, and so on and so forth. If our individuals are increasingly self-diagnosing what they need and go out to TED Talks or go out to Google and get their own content, they're sort of bypassing the center. Now, there may be a quality threshold issue that goes on there. But the other point as well is that what's my role as the central broker anymore? And I think we need to rethink our role in L&D to being a Sherpa or a guide to help people find their own bolt holes in their learning trajectory and give our experience and our guide towards where they can find the material that they need. So as part of this shift towards, in my view, a more grown-up environment that is assumed by digital learning, there's a different role being assigned by the learning officers as well.
And also that idea of being a grown-up environment. But do you think in some cases organisations, whether that's L&D or whether that's HR or the organisation more generally, have almost dumbed this down, have almost taken control and treated the employee like a child? Do you think that's part of the problem in the past in some organisations?
Going right back to the 1950s Kirkpatrick model, as robust and as coherent as it is, it still has the learner as an object in the learning dynamic. And that finds echoes going back to Dickens, the tabula rasa and even Aristotle. We saw learning minds as vessels to be filled, and they are an object in this pedagogic transaction. And I'm trying to flip that and try and become the learner to being a subject rather than an object. And if you walk around any of the halls at LearnTech or DevLearn, or we were at Elliott Mazie in Florida a couple of weeks ago, there's all about trying to get an engaged learner. And I think part of the reason behind, if there is a disengaged learner out there, or unengaged, depending on how you want to term it, it's because learning is something that is done to them rather than learning that is something that they do. So what I'm also assuming here is that people are taking joint responsibility for this, leaning forward and getting involved. And I think we do need to leave behind models that see the individual as an object in this learning dynamic. Now, I've seen some comments there to say, do people know where to get this? And I'm actually going to loop back to the marketing communication. This is Derek. I'm going to come back to the idea of marketing communication and awareness of that, because I think it's absolutely fundamental as part of this dynamic as well. So the third element, Joe, that we're going to move on to is the idea of technology, because Carrie-Anne Moss is able to pull up what is there, I think, a Motorola, actually, funnily enough. So that dates it right back to 1999 when this movie came out. So it's 20 years ago, believe it or not. And we have technology that works. So again, those of us that are saddled with Soviet-era learning management systems that are clunky, that treat us to a very unsavory experience, have to be replaced by something that's more elegant, that's more intuitive, and that works to help the user at their moment of need. So think of all of this as a retailing phenomenon. You know, you're at the checkout desk, you want to go and grab something, and then you realize, oh, there's a long queue, leave it, I'll go and fetch it elsewhere. So we've estimated that you have about a 5-minute window of opportunity. So that means in practice, I need to have a conflict conversation with a colleague this afternoon. So there's our moment of need. I need to go and find some material to help me get this right, because, you know, I don't get a second bite of the cherry. Where is that material? So I'm on, as you indicated, Joe, perhaps not a fantastic device, maybe in 2.5G network and so forth. I still need to go and access that content, consume it, and be done. You have about 5 minutes to play with there. So that's a really good rule of thumb for looking at your own technology, you know, systems, be it learning management system, be it LXP, be it mobile, whatever it is. You've got about 5 minutes to play with. If it goes longer than that, you've lost your impulse or trigger learner. So technology is clearly key to this, but not to get lost in all of the speeds and feeds dialogue that technology can indulge in, more to see it as a tool to do a job and to put the clock on. And if it doesn't deliver in 5-6 minutes, maybe think about replacing it with something that's a bit faster, better, and stronger as well. And you're right. I mean, we're seeing here, some people see LMS as a bolt-on to talent management, and then perhaps they'll see, Felicity, they'll see mobile as a bolt-on to the LMS, and so on it goes. I get all that. But if you have a mobile-first strategy or a learner-centric strategy to start with and work back from that moment, then there are a number of simple tools out there that don't cost very much that you can deploy to actually get stuff out to people quite quickly. It may not bolt into payroll and talent management and HCM and all of those other systems, that's fine, but you are getting content out to people really quickly and easily and doing some very basic tracking around it as well. So I think there are some tools out there, but then it's down to policy. Can you deploy them, or do you end up being having guerrilla warfare in your own organization by keeping things under the radar? And that's more common than you might think. So there was an earlier point, I think it was Derek, around do people know where it is? And I think actually there's some really good technology out there. There's some really good content out there. But I think that the learning system needs to deploy more and more of the internal communication or marketing communication maneuvers. I think we need to sell learning into our colleagues rather than tell them what to do. And I think we need to learn a series of maneuvers that help people know where the content is and find out how to get a hold of it as well. One way of doing this, of course, is the way that you name the content. So to give you a quick example, we've been learning partners with London Business School for a few years now, and we'll create a digital companion to maybe a learning and strategy session. Now, if you name the content learning and strategy, there's no events based behind that. So what we need to do is chunk the content down to a series of transactions that an individual can understand, i.e. situated in their diary, such as, in this instance, how to start a change effort, how to understand the emotional cycle of change, how to reduce resistance to change. So by chunking it down to a series of specific event-based or calendar-based maneuvers, you're beginning the first step towards situating your learning material in their work life. And I think we have to do that. Again, it was easier for Keanu and Carrie-Anne Moss. They're stood on top of a skyscraper. They need to get out, and he says, "Can you fly that thing?" So the skill gap is pretty clear, and she already knows where to go fetch the material. And then the last point is there, which I think is, I think you see a lot of, or some marketing communication pulling through. You see some decent technology being deployed. You see an increasing awareness of the importance of at least allowing the colleagues to co-create knowledge and learning solutions. And I think that there's definite acknowledgement when you're coming to Gen Y and Gen Z that you need to give people easy and access content wherever it is. What I see less of is the compelling event. Why should somebody look at this now? And if you think back to my little video vignette from The Matrix, the baddies are coming up the stairs. That's why they need to look at it now. And if you're looking at soft skills, so-called soft skills such as personal effectiveness, sales, maybe leadership management, if there isn't a compelling event implied in the learning object, including its naming convention, people are less likely to go to it. So it needs to be really clear as to what's in it for me at this moment in time, or people will go, yeah, I need to get to that. So how you curate, how you personalize, how you make digitally relevant the content to those individuals is absolutely key to successful engagement. It doesn't cost much to do that, if anything, and it gets much more investment for any much more return for any investment that you make. So I think those 5 kind of points are sitting underneath that little video vignette, and I think it's a nice exemplar of some of the key things that are happening when a digital strategy and an implementation are being deployed successfully.
All of those 5 points out of basically 30 seconds of a Hollywood movie, but you're absolutely right. There it is. Yes, absolutely. There's a whole other topic
micro learning for you.
Another half an hour on. We're going to.
Yeah, and then Joe, you said they're learning in the flow of work, and that's a phrase that my friends over at Filtered with their great tool Magpie talk about, which is how you situate content into the flow of work. How do you associate it? And I think in principle, having learning that happens in a distant location and a different time and space is becoming less of an option, almost operationally for a lot of companies, and has also got this built-in inefficiency of content retention decay. Going back to, as the Eppinghaus forgetting curve from 1886 or whatever. So we've always acknowledged that there is content retention decay going on. But increasingly, if we can drop content in at the moment of need, rather than just in case, it's just in time, you're probably in a more efficient environment. Now, you can't do everything, of course. Moreover, there is fantastic benefits to people meeting physically in an analog, networking, sharing other values as well, and so forth. But for topping up learning, this might be a good way of thinking it through.
Yes, I do love that. And I think there's lots of different ways we can slice and dice that and have that conversation. We're going to go into a reflection in a couple of moments where I'm going to ask everybody what they're going to do after today's session. I wanted to come back to this point about the role of L&D within this whole matrix style learning that we're talking about. Derek, as you pointed out, had said some people are aware of their skills gap, but they don't know where to pull the learning down. We've got Felicity and others talking about the LMS and the quality of that. So what's our role within L&D before we go into our reflection?
Is this a question for me? Well, I think going back to the idea of the Sherpa, using our expertise to know what's good, because I think quality, particularly in a workplace environment, I think quality is key. There's a lot of nonsense out there as well, and you don't want to be using digital to inculcate bad practice. That happens on the job regardless. So we do have still a quality threshold to work at. Thinking through the strategy as well. You know, digital learning is a different way of learning. It's not just a different type of learning. But so understanding the strategy and allowing folks to call down content in a moment of need, associating that with the business is key. And I think the business partnership we have is absolutely important, because if we don't deploy or at least make available content that is of use to people and then course adjust based on the data that we see, then we're not really doing our jobs. But there is an assumption that we understand what's going on in the rest of the organization. And there's been some debate as to whether your standard learning officer is as up to speed with what goes on in the rest of the business as they should be. Josh Bersin at Bersin by Deloitte 2 years ago said that the learning department in the US had a net promoter score of -8. And Charles Jennings, when he was advancing research underneath the 70-20-10 methodology, said that 53% of managers would actively discourage their colleagues from working with the learning department. Now, if that data is anyway correct, it does mean that we've got a lot of work to do to build bridges between the learning apparatus and the business apparatus in order to be able to feed or through material into the flow of work that is of material use to people.
Love that, Gerry, and I've been getting very involved in the chat window here. Some great points, including from Sophie saying at the ELN Connect event, a conference last week, somebody made the point that digital learning should be used also to give tasks to the learner to facilitate transfer, which is absolutely brilliant. There's been some recommendations and links in there for people to share too. Now we're going to move into our reflection. So Gerry is still here. We're not done, but we are coming off of video. So let's move into our reflection piece now. What I'd like everybody to think about, please, and an answer is, what are you going to do now? So we've had this conversation, you've got some links, you've got some things to go and look up if you want to, you've had all sorts of different thoughts there from Gerry. In that chat window on the left, and if you're on a mobile device, you might need to select a different chat window or just use the main one. It's whatever is easiest for you. It doesn't matter too much. What is that you're going to do now? What's your reflection? And Martin's already said in the main chat window, reflection and rebuilding learning based on Gerry's last few bulletins sounds really good. So thank you very much for that, Martin. And I'm really liking the fact that, I've gone and shared a few different things in the chat window that might help people. So has John, including a book on Richard Thaler's book on nudge theory. So there could be a few things that you want to go and have a look up. Nikki says, I've copied the link to the podcast that I put in the chat box for future listening. Thank you, Nikki. Really interested to know what it is that you're taking away from this. And whilst you're typing, Gerry, what are some of the key points that you've seen maybe in the chat window and in this conversation that we've been having today?
I think the podcast is, the nudge theory is an important one. And I implied it when we're looking at the retail phenomenon of somebody at the checkout desk grabbing material that they didn't necessarily go into the shop for, but it's no accident that they're going out with it. And retailers are fantastic at nudge theory and making subtle suggestions to get. And I think as well, as part of the marketing communication apparatus, nudge theory, which is also called choice architecture or strategic influencing, can be a fantastic way. It's a pretty smart internal communication maneuver, but it can be a smart way of encouraging our colleagues to pull down content rather than pushing stuff at them. So people feel much more involved and engaged if they feel that they are part of the solution rather than being, prescribed or dictated to. So I think nudge theory is a particularly rich way of managing a choice architecture to allow people to call down the learning content at their moment of need. That means that you need to associate the benefits for people, but you also need to make sure that there are no tripwires to switch them off as well.
Thank you. Derek poses a really good question in chat. Do we need to move away from learning and knowledge provider to more of a performance management approach? And I think it's a little bit of everything, Derek, but I think you're right to say we need to include more of that. There's a great book on performance consultancy by Nigel Harrison. That's a really good one to go and have a look up. And what are the actions that we're going to do? Derek says review the content titles to make more specific learning need to maximize the 5 minutes we have. That's always a really good one, Derek. Ruth says follow up and read more about nudge theory. Look at the timing of training and when it's delivered and why this is. Rachel says to increase the engagement with our L&D team and increase our influence across the organization via marketing comms. That's a really great one to work with them. Wendy says, share the knowledge and links with my team and colleagues, use the data and information to further build the business case for digital transformation in my organization. And other stuff coming through here as well, including that point on nudge theory. So do keep adding some more to that if you want to. I'm going to put that chat window in the top right, but I can't believe it's been an absolute whirlwind. We've come to the end of our half an hour. Gerry, thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you've got some fun out of this as well.
It's been real. Thank you so much for participating and for all your questions that have nudged me along. Lucy at skillpill.com, my colleague, has got a white paper that has pulled together some of these key points. It's available to you from Lucy if you wish. And, don't be a stranger.
Fantastic.
Keep in touch.
Thank you so much. And what I will do is also share your contact details in the chat window as well, so everybody can go and click on those links if they want to. It's been really useful to have this conversation. Thank you so much. And you can also go and connect with Gerry on LinkedIn as well if you want to. And that's actually the last one that we're going to do live this year, which is a bit of a sad time, obviously, but we are coming to the end of the year. You can go to our website and you can find everything on our website, all the recordings of previous things that you can go and have a look at, including this one very soon. But what we've got coming up, we're doing something a little bit different. If you go and follow Training Journal on Twitter and you keep an eye on the #TJtalks hashtag, what you'll find is actually we're going to be switching up and doing something a little bit different, which is you'll be able to go and find some videos that we've recorded already. We're lining those up for the rest of the year and into next year. And we're going to be having some Twitter chats with those as well. And if you want to go and follow me, I'll tweet about those too. So thank you so much to Gerry today. And thank you so much to all of you for everything in the chat window and all of your interaction. Enjoy the rest of your day and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.